All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. So, for those of you who are just joining in to the live stream on the audio, friendly reminder that you can jump into the Zoom session by clicking the link in my bio and then following that link to the Zoom link. It will take you to the live seminar. You're welcome to see the slides there. And then also, you'll have to forgive me because today I'm under the weather. I have a cold. I'm a little bit sniffly. I've got a little bit of congestion. I might blow my nose here and there, so I sincerely apologize. Hopefully by next week I'll be up and back to 100. This week, some interesting things have transpired in terms of politics and government, but also some interesting parallels regarding global politics and world politics. So I figured that in the first day that I'm teaching for November, where SNAP benefits appear to have gotten shut off, maybe, although some federal judges have kind of intervened on that front, and I'm highlighting the different ways that race pattern disparities, racial inequality shows up in American society. Hopefully, you're following me as we build toward the road of the discussion regarding reparations. But as we explore these different aspects, something very important is happening this week in terms of SNAP benefits getting cut off. So I wanted to take some time to talk about SNAP benefits, food insecurity, um, malnutrition, those kinds of things, and what they look like in the context of the United States of America. There's lots of people on my Instagram page. They chime in, they say things like, "Oh, Western culture is superior," and blah blah blah. But I think to an extent they're woefully ignorant of the various experiences that people have in the United States that are not necessarily reflective of their own, and food insecurity is certainly one of those things. This might be one of the lighter, shorter lectures, only because right now I'm under the weather. I do intend to go to 2 hours or as long as I can go, but if my voice starts to kind of tail out, I might cut it off just a little bit early. But I'm here, I'm committed. Let's go ahead and get started here. So, as I said, in talking about food insecurity, the primary motivation here are a few things. First of all, I think it goes without saying that there's no way I can talk about food insecurity without mentioning Palestinian starvation. I think that's absolutely important. And I think Palestinian starvation and what's happening in Gaza, what's happening at the hands of the Israeli officials, is absolutely atrocious. It's a crime against humanity. It's a humanitarian crisis. And part of this lecture, although I'm talking about what is relevant to the American context, part of what I'm talking about here also echoes much of what's going on. Now, no, I'm not talking about this in the context of having missiles and bombs dropped on your apartment buildings, but certainly there are people in the United States, believe it or not, that are experiencing hunger, especially children in the most extreme impoverished conditions. So I would like to draw your attention as we're talking about this in the context of the US. I want you to be able to keep Palestinian starvation, excuse me, in the back of your mind. Okay. The other thing I want to mention to you, right, is that's absolutely relevant is it's November 2nd. So as of yesterday, and by the start of the fiscal week, which I believe is Monday, SNAP benefits, to my knowledge, is officially cut off. I am aware that certain judges have ordered the Trump administration to pay out SNAP benefits, specifically while the government is shut down. But I want to draw your attention to a few things here because as we turn our attention to the US, SNAP benefits, welfare benefits, food stamps, alimony checks, these kinds of things have historically been associated with Black people and people of color. And the common narrative around these things is this idea that, oh, they're lazy and oh, they're entitled and oh, they just don't want to work hard. And if they just got a job, if they could just pick themselves up by their bootstraps, then they wouldn't need to be affected by these things, yada, yada, the list goes on. Right. And so I want to draw your attention to this. I perhaps if you follow me on my Instagram, you've seen me talk about this a few times, is SNAP benefit recipients according to their demographic factors. Okay. And this is data from the Pew Research Center, data that corresponds to the year 2020. This web page entitled What the Data Says About Food Stamps in the US was published in 2023. So don't get the dates mixed up. The source of the data is from about 5 years ago, published about 3 years ago. Okay. And so what we can see in terms of demographic variables here is, first of all, we're looking at age. And what you can see in the breakdown in the distribution of age, these numbers are percentages, is we're looking at mostly those people who are receiving SNAP benefits are between the ages of 25 and 64. Now, yes, we have some variation in between. Perhaps even the populations younger than 18 are generally those people whose parents might be recipients of SNAP benefits, and so therefore they are recipients of SNAP benefits, right? But then in terms of the racial breakdown, we have something very interesting is what we can see is white, whether they are Hispanic white or non-Hispanic white. White people represent 62.7% of SNAP benefit recipients across the US. Okay. This isn't for a specific state, this is nationwide. Now, what do I mean when I say Hispanic white versus non-Hispanic white? Well, most Americans don't traditionally understand this, but whiteness doesn't necessarily belong to English speaking and Germanic speaking Europe. Okay. Whiteness also exists in Spain. Spain is a European country. Spanish is a European language. And yes, there are Spanish speaking white people in Spanish speaking countries in the Americas who appear nearly identical, racially speaking, to the white people we conventionally associate with whiteness in the United States. Okay. So in the demographic metrics here, we're just talking about ethnicity in terms of Hispanic. And then we go to Black people, where we can see Black people represent 27%. Okay. So 27% nationwide is Black people. Now, it makes you wonder, it makes you ask this question, why is it that SNAP benefits has been associated with Blackness and Black people? And why is it that in the year 2025, we have Brittany Venti and Lily Gaddis and all of these right-wing racist people wearing blackface and talking about laziness and EBT and blah, blah, blah? Okay, well, believe it or not, okay, there was always this notion of somehow unearned entitlement when it came to government benefits. Okay. Now, government benefits and the people who received them goes back to the 1940s. This is the era where Franklin D. Roosevelt was president. Okay. And Franklin D. Roosevelt inherited in America that was starving. Okay. Everyone, regardless of race, was severely impoverished because Herbert Hoover, the president prior to FDR, had essentially neglected the American populace as a whole. Banks, businesses, the government had no way of regulating businesses and the economy at all. And so what happened was the elite, the absolute greedy, wealthy elite, ran the American economy into the ground. And essentially, what happened was Herbert Hoover, in addition to some other things, did not want to be seen as helping Black people by trying to extend a helping hand to the American public. He espoused this notion that people, if they want to work hard, if they want to be sufficient in life, if they want to succeed, it's entirely their fault. And they should pick themselves up by their bootstraps. And if they can't do that, then they really don't deserve food. They don't deserve the comforts that come with fair and equitable living. Okay. And so that inertia carried through the FDR administration, where FDR is passing programs. He's creating all kinds of unique administrations. He's basically throwing whatever he can to address the different problems that Americans face. This is where we get Social Security benefits. This is where we get SNAP benefits. Yes, even ironically, this is where you get the National Rifle Association. Okay, but that's for a completely different topic. But FDR is passing all of these different programs and creating all of these administrations for the government specifically to help Americans out of the Great Depression. Okay. And so who's reaping the benefits? Well, most of these benefits are going to primarily white families. But in a trickle down effect, where there is, in fact, an administration of these benefits, in certain states, there are Black people that are receiving these benefits too. Now, they're not receiving these benefits nearly comparable to the rates of white people, but because Black people appear to be receiving the same benefits that white people do, insert racial stereotype there. It becomes a thing where white people begin to mock Black people, right? It's a way to delegitimize Black people having fair and equal access. And so what comes of that is, why aren't you working for what you earn? No, you're lazy. You're not picking yourself up by your bootstraps. You shouldn't be mooching off of the government when you could be working and earning your living while these white people are both working and receiving benefits from the government. So that just becomes a cultural staple. It becomes like a rhetorical talking point that sticks in the American cultural psyche for generations and generations and generations, kind of like blackface. Right? We love to look at blackface as this thing that just it existed in the early 1900s and the 1800s, and it was racist and it was a problem, but it's old now. And yet, year after year, we always have to see white people mocking Black people in these traditionally racist ways, right? So, this notion about SNAP benefit recipients, blackface, the entitlement, the people who are welfare moochers, all of these things continue to survive in the American cultural psyche and in the American cultural lexicon. Okay. And then below Black people, if I wasn't detouring enough, below Black people, we then see that Asian people or all other races, Hispanic people, are either 27% or less than that. Okay. Now, most people who are receiving SNAP benefits here are also native born. What we mean by native born was born and raised on American soil. We have that at 87.8%, where foreign born people who might be receiving SNAP benefits only represent 12.2%. Now, before I deviate, well, I'm going to deviate, and I promise I will get back to the central topic. Hopefully, you're following. But what I want to draw attention to here is this there's this ongoing rhetoric that Democrats are trying to pass a bill that will allow quote unquote illegal immigrants to get free health care. Okay. And I just want to draw your attention to what we can already see in terms of welfare benefits in the form of SNAP benefits is that most of the benefits are going to native born people. Yes, a small minority of foreign born people are receiving those benefits, but by and large, any notion around receiving government assistance for healthcare would have to imply something similar to what we're observing in terms of SNAP benefits. Just call it welfare, right? So I want you to think about that. Then as we go down, we're looking at education or educational attainment. And what we can see by and large is there are people who have a bachelor's degree, there's people with no high school education, and everywhere in between. But the significant majority of those people at least have a high school diploma or a GED. Okay. So what we're looking at here are people who are, at least by and large, educated to the American standard of a high school education and then appear to not be employed. 61% of those receiving SNAP benefits are not employed. Then, among those, let's say the children who are the recipients of these benefits, we see people, those children who have two parents or live in a two-parent household, that's 43%. Two married parents, 33%. And then mother only is 45%. And then father only is 5%. So, what we can gather from the demographic breakdown of those who are receiving SNAP benefits in the US is that they are generally white mothers, single mothers, between the ages of 25 and 64 with a high school education, born and raised in the US. Now, look at the two images that you see on either side of this demographic breakdown. And what you're looking at here are ding, 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 white women racializing Black people for receiving help from the government when they're the demographic that is primarily receiving SNAP benefits here. Isn't that interesting how that works? So when I tell you that this is echoing the legacies of American culture and American history, those people who call themselves conservative, they don't just exist in a bubble. They really are, in fact, channeling notions of American culture. And throughout the American cultural timeline, what they deem to be traditional values associated with their country, with their nation, with their identity, is firmly rooted in these ideas that have existed since the time of FDR. Blackface, welfare entitlement, mooching off of the system, racial normativity, making fun of Black people. The layers go on. And you can see that in 2025, it's not like they're digging back 100 years into the past. These things have just survived. Okay. So let's get to the topic of food insecurity. And what we need to do first is we need to establish some terms and some definitions here, right? Well, I want to, excuse me for a second. Excuse me. I want to start with the definition of food security. Okay. Food security, as defined by the World Food Summit, is defined as food security exists when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active, healthy lifestyle. Okay, that is what food security is. Okay, so now by this definition, we're going to break this apart, and I'm going to explain to you how the United States as a country is food insecure. Okay. By the definition, let's break this down. Food security exists when all people, it didn't say people, it said all people, and at all times have physical access and economic access. So, physical access being perhaps the spatial distance between you and food. And then economic access is perhaps you have that spatial availability. You're in proximity to the food, but you do not have the economic buying power to be able to then access that food. So you need to be physically in proximity and you have to be able to economically access those things, which would then imply that as a country, before I start showing you all of these maps and everything, the United States is technically food insecure. This is the same country that people in my comment section want to say, oh, this is superior culture, and oh, we're the best, and oh, we're the greatest nation on earth, and blah, blah, blah. Well, do you think that it just as a standard, the greatest nation on earth should at least meet the minimum standards of what the rest of the world is saying food security is? Okay, something to think about. I still love this country, but that's not going to stop me from having my criticism here, right? So then that implies then that if that is what food security is, all people at all times have access both physically and economically, then what is food insecurity? Well, according to the World Food Summit, food insecurity is a situation that exists when people lack secure access to sufficient amounts of safe and nutritious food for normal growth and development and an active, healthy lifestyle. Okay, so now if I juxtaposed these two definitions here, what it did not say was food insecurity is when you don't have food. That's not the case. It's when you don't have access to safe and nutritious foods in order to be conducive to a healthy lifestyle. So, in essence, you can be surrounded by pizzas, burgers, fries, fried chicken, tacos, burritos, soda, candy, all of those things, which can in fact give you calories. But if you do not have access to the foods that are conducive to healthy living, then even if you're surrounded by calories, you're still food insecure. Now, how does that describe the United States, if not to a T? That's the United States here. Okay. So now that we've established the definition for food security and food insecurity, excuse me for a second. Okay, now we need to establish the definition of undernutrition. What is undernutrition? Undernutrition is when people are enduring prolonged low levels of food intake. Okay, that means that they're not consuming a whole lot of food. You can see how Gaza certainly would connect to this. Let me take a sip of water for a second. Okay, so undernutrition generally describes either energetic or protein deficiency. It could be vitamin deficiency and mineral deficiency too, but overall, we're talking about macro and micronutrient deficiency. That with the little foods that you're able to get, you're still not really getting enough to sufficiently consume what would be recommended for a daily consumption within a 24-hour period. Okay. So there are people, believe it or not necessarily to the extreme extent like Gaza, but there are in fact large numbers of people in the context of the United States that are experiencing undernutrition. And that undernutrition is facilitated by poverty. Facilitated by poverty. The same poverty that in our capitalistic culture and society, we have a way of mocking people for, ridiculing people for, despite the fact that overwhelming circumstances keep them stuck in that position. Well, how do we define poverty? Poverty is defined by earning a fixed low income. What is a fixed low income? Think about that. Minimum wage. What is the minimum wage? I saw an interesting reel. I'm deviating here. I saw an interesting reel a few days ago of a person who said the minimum wage, when adjusted for inflation in 2025, should be something like $66. The minimum wage, depending on your state, can range between $7.50 to $17. Nowhere near what the adjusted inflation rate should be. So when you're earning a fixed low income is your income doesn't vary. It's dependent on your hours and it stays stable. So it could be $15 an hour. It could be $17 an hour. It could be $7.50 an hour. But the point is that it means that most people will kind of frequently anticipate running out of money and running out of money regularly. And it's not because of their spending habits. It's not because they're living a lavish life. It's because the cost of living is so extraordinarily high that they cannot feasibly dig themselves out of poverty in any reasonable way. Okay. So what this does then is poverty will force families or people to ration their meals. I've heard people who were SNAP benefits recipients. Yes, in the context of yes, in the context of the United States of America. And I'm specifically thinking of a video that DL Hughley posted a few days ago of a white woman talking about how she is rationing meals and she can't fathom what her life is going to be like without SNAP benefits. So rationing meals, which might imply skipping meals altogether. Maybe that means you got some takeout somewhere and you're splitting that takeout across 2 or maybe 3 days. And you're over relying on non-perishable foods. What are the non-perishable foods? Top ramen, canned goods. Now, canned goods will take you far, but they don't necessarily have the same nutritional value as fresh produce, right? But now people stuck in extreme positions in poverty in the United States are living in these circumstances. Now, I want to remind you of this again before we move forward. As we've established all of our definitions, all of our talking points up to this point, I remind you of the people who then have the luxury to ridicule those in irrational ways. Absolute irrational ways. Okay. One last term. No. Two more terms before we move forward. Okay. Then we have undernourishment. Okay. Undernourishment describes people whose food intake is like regularly providing them less than the minimum energy requirements. Now, according to my knowledge, the FDA has standardized 1,800 kilocalories per day. Okay, that is the daily recommended. And if you're over that, chances are the estimate or expectation is that you will gain weight. It can be healthy weight, it could be bad weight. If you're under that, chances are you will lose weight. But if you can somehow manage to maintain in the middle, you'll keep a healthy, steady balance. Okay. Now, undernourishment is usually determined by your body size, right? Your fat content relative to your height, perhaps your physical activity on a day-to-day basis, whether you're pregnant, right? So undernourishment as a status can vary, and some women, believe it or not, when they become pregnant, can become undernourished because their body is trying to create another human being, right? So doctors will often recommend dietary adjustments to pregnant women on that front. So, or undernourishment does not necessarily mean a lack of access to healthy food. However, overwhelmingly, it can be characterized as such. And then we have malnutrition. Okay, this is different than undernourishment. Okay. In general, malnutrition is a state or a condition in which good health is hindered. You cannot achieve good health because of the status of the nutrition that you consume and receive on a regular basis, or perhaps an irregular basis, right? It's caused by inadequate and unbalanced food intake generally, or from poor absorption of food consumed. So now, as I give my throat a rest for a moment, I got to give my throat a rest. I want to show you or give you a little bit of a taste of what food insecurity looks like in the context of the United States. Okay, check this video out. I'm sorry if a commercial pops up. It's not my intention to make a commercial pop up, but I want to show you this. I'm going to give my throat a rest, and then on the back end, we'll talk about this.
Now for our network-wide series, A Nation Divided, a focus on existing racial and socioeconomic divides often magnified by this pandemic. Tonight, we want to take you to the community many are calling ground zero for COVID-19 in Chicago. Residents here have dealt with issues like food insecurity for years. But tonight, an anonymous network of Black donors are stepping up to help their own. And their donations are changing lives in communities across the country. Our Deborah Roberts reports.
Jackie Gordon walks the same Chicago track every day, circle after circle, alone.
So much happens to us that nothing really surprises you anymore.
Alone and neglected is how many in this community have felt for years, stuck in a circle of poverty that existed long before this pandemic.
In this area, I think that we don't have a lot of the resources that we need to have, whether it's dealing with health, whether it's dealing with food, or dealing with just everyday things that people, necessities that we have to have.
Nikia Love has lived in Chicago's Auburn Gresham neighborhood her entire life. In the 40s, her grandparents helped integrate the block, a community now 96% Black.
Everyone is a close net because we've all just been here for so long.
Auburn Gresham saw the first COVID-19 death in the state, but this certainly isn't the first time it has dealt with adversity. What was life like in Auburn Gresham even before COVID?
Well, prior to, there was still economic issues. Businesses were closing. Two of the main businesses, one was a grocery store, Save-A-Lot. They shut down in January. So that was walking distance for a lot of residents.
If you look at the surrounding area, you will see there's no grocery stores. The only type of grocery store that we do have is considered Walgreens.
Unemployment here nearly 30%, and that's before the 1 in 4 Americans who lost a job in the pandemic. What is it like being furloughed and not being at work at this moment?
It is challenging. So the first thing that went into my mind was, how am I getting ready to feed my child every day, all day?
Nikia worries about her 12-year-old daughter. She is not alone.
I would say right now there is a very strong need for food.
Food insecurity on the rise, not just in Chicago, but cities and states around the country.
I'm scared, to be quite honest with you.
Shardea Fuqua lives in Detroit with her 1-year-old daughter and 2-year-old son.
Can you point to a letter, Chloe? Wow.
Since the pandemic began, according to the Brookings Institute, 17% of moms with children 12 and under say their kids are not eating enough because they can't afford food. That's a 460% jump from 2018.
In my community in Detroit urban areas, is not a lot of opportunities to have really healthy food. I'm going to be really clear and honest with you. I live in Highland Park, Michigan. They do sell foods that are not maybe expired and high price foods.
For a lot of people, having the kids at home, it's like, well, we've got to be more creative. We've got to make sure they're not bored. Those are the biggest concerns. But in your community, the concerns are much greater than that.
Absolutely, the concerns are greater. I can't think about creative activities because I'm thinking about I'm about to get evicted. I know I need to feed you today.
It's taken a virtual village to help parents like Shardea. She was among 200 families offered a $500 grant by Focus Hope, a Detroit charity helping with essentials and missed bills.
That money really supported me with bills.
Money that likely wouldn't have arrived if not for an anonymous network of Black donors with means.
What we really understand is that as a community, we have to take care of ourselves. We can't rely on anyone else to take care of ourselves.
Scott Mills, president of BET, realized how the virus was hitting communities of color early on and sprung into action.
While the country was focused on how this was going to impact the country at large, we very specifically focused on, holy cow, the effect of this on the African American community is going to be uniquely devastating because it's going to compound these pre-existing conditions.
Pre-existing conditions like food insecurity. And while the daily struggle among African Americans is real, there are those in the top tier, CEOs, business executives, others who want to give back. An Urban Institute study found of any race, Black families contributed the largest proportion of their wealth to charities.
We started with the goal of raising $5 to $10 million, recognizing that the economic environment was so challenging. With the support of this group, we've secured over $17 million of commitments of support. And that it was in a matter of weeks. It was extraordinary.
$17 million dispatched all across the country, from Los Angeles to New Orleans to the Greater Auburn Development Corporation in Chicago. What if the Greater Auburn Gresham Development Corporation wasn't helping right now? What would life be like during this pandemic?
I couldn't tell you. I could not tell you, because when I say to you, my first thought was, how can I feed my child? My second thought was, how am I getting ready to pay my rent?
A charity rapidly changing how it operates. Just last week, starting weekly food pantries. And Monday, more than 2 months after the first COVID death, the organization opening its first community testing site.
You'll have your results within 24 to 48 hours, all right?
Results from its leaders, what the community has been hoping for decades.
Where do we go from here? Because as soon as it ends, we're still in the same predicament.
A circle of poverty that those who are able are desperately trying to break.
If there's something positive that we can extract from this, it is this call to arms to address these structural deficiencies and these structural barriers that are impacting our community, because something will happen after COVID. This is not the end. And we really have to make sure that our community is better positioned to prosper in good times and to not suffer disproportionately in difficult times.
Would it surprise you to know that there are a lot of people of color who are privileged, who have contributed to make sure a fund like this is there for people in your neighborhood?
No, I think we are very intelligent people. I think we are a very educated ethnic group. I'm grateful to hear that, to know that. It actually encourages me even more to keep going. And maybe one day I will be on the other side helping the next person, giving back to my community.
Deborah Roberts, ABC News.
Okay, right. And so what you can see here is a few things, right? First of all, we have very clear signs of neighborhood disadvantage. The community that they're living in is worn down. More importantly, what I want to draw your attention to is that this video that I've showed you is a few years old. This is back during the pandemic era, okay? So if food insecurity was already a thing that was being amplified by the emerging crisis caused by COVID, right? What might that imply about then cutting off SNAP benefits? Okay. And so keep in mind here, there's a little bit of a somewhat of a conundrum here. And that conundrum is that where we have a disproportionate number of white women who are the recipients of SNAP benefits, with Black people running in second, not even really close, but second to that, why is there such food insecurity? Okay. How is it that Black people can simultaneously receive SNAP benefits, but then also still be food insecure? How does that work? Okay. And so that's a question I want to pose to you because I'm jumping ahead of myself a few slides. Um, so I'll come back to that question. How is it that Black people are simultaneously receiving SNAP benefits, but then also maintain food insecurity? And that's a question I will address in just a moment. Here, I want to turn your attention to a few things. First of all, I want to mention that below the video where it said KFC mom and ration mom, you'll have to forgive me. I didn't edit that particular slide. The reason for that is whenever I give this lecture in the context of my college courses, I usually select. I'm very selective about which videos I show, which talking points I want to make. And there's a video that I have of a mom who is suffering food insecurity and has to regularly rely on KFC to feed her children. That will make sense in a few slides when I tell you about it. I'm not going to show you that video, but that's usually the slide where I show that video. So apologies if the whole KFC reference didn't make sense. Back to my point here. How is food insecurity um, affecting people in terms of their health? Right. And for this, we come to what is called the life course perspective. The life course perspective is this idea, kind of in anthropology, somewhat in demographer's perspective, but it's one thing in which you're talking about the total exposure of a person's life to economic stressors or environmental conditions that then influence the trajectory of their health outcomes later in life. Okay. And so, one extreme example of this, which also touches on the implications that might come from the Palestinian starvation here, is the Dutch famine. Okay. So, back during World War II, when there was extreme crisis, okay, there was also a case of famine going on in Dutchland called the Dutch famine, okay, in which young children were being exposed to severe malnutrition and undernourishment for prolonged periods of time. Okay. And so what happened was their bodies began to adapt to those extreme exposures. And those adaptations, as measured in one particular study, showed up in the age at menarche. Age at menarche is usually the age at which females get their first period. There's an evolutionary explanation for this. That if the body is exposed to extreme famine, and what you can see here on this graph that I'm showing you, the odds of the females receiving or coming into their age at menarche is usually quickened. It's earlier. And the reason for that is because the body biologically has a goal to survive and reproduce. And if the environment is highly lethal or if it's high risk to lethality, then it will quicken the time that it has to potentially reproduce, leading to earlier ages at menarche, which then has implications on female health outcomes throughout the life course, also implying or having implications and influence on their total life expectancy from the time of their exposure. So their life stages are getting quickened or hastened over time. Okay. And you can see that in terms of race effects in the context of the United States. Racially speaking, because we're talking about a group of people who are regularly exposed to systemic, environmental, ecological forms of stress in a historical context, in a racialized context, that you can then observe how that is affecting their bodies at earlier ages. Okay. And so what you're looking at here is, I believe it's from the same study, and I'm so sorry that I did not put the citation in the bottom. I will make note to cite this study in the bottom. I will also add this study in my Patreon here. Um, Age at Menarche. Apologies for that. It's just human error. Age at Minarchy. So that you can see the study for yourself. Um, Essentially, what they're looking at here is the likelihood for young girls to achieve minarchy and what are the causes for that. Okay, so now here in the context of looking at race patterned effects, maybe we're talking about exposure to famine, which is highly unlikely. However, we are talking about regular exposures to stressors. And what we can see here is on the comparison of the graph anyway, where you have the solid line that is white girls, the solid line for white girls seems to be the most prolonged outward, that if you are white, raised in the United States, at least for the context of this study, your likelihood to hit minarchy is a little bit later than compared to Mexican American girls who are kind of in the middle, more skewed toward the black end, and then black girls who are the furthest on the end. So black girls are achieving age at minarchy uh, upwards of like 2 years, 2 to 3 years earlier than white and Mexican girls. Isn't that interesting? And so now we're starting to look at perhaps it's not just exposure to famine, it's also just exposure to stressors in the life course. And in the context of, excuse me, in the context of looking at race patterned effects in this regard, then we're talking about exposures to racism at an early age that are influencing how these people are getting access to nutrition and perhaps how they get access to nutrition early in their life signals to their body that they need to speed up the prospects of reproduction for the sake of survival and continuing progeny down successive generations. Now, what's characterizing this? How is it that we are able to observe race patterned effects on the body over the life course as represented by stages of development in the human body? Well, one of the theoretical explanations for this is called the grocery gap. Okay, and this goes back to the question I was raising before I diverted into this whole effects on the body thing. Is how is it that Black people simultaneously receive EBT but are also food insecure too? It is explained by the grocery gap. Okay, the grocery gap here is a conceptual idea characterized in scientific research and academia as an area with no grocery stores. And generally, an area with no grocery stores has a boundary limit. The boundary limit, sometimes in the context of 1 mile, there is no grocery store within 1 mile. In other studies I have seen, it is that there is no grocery store within 2 miles. Okay. So between 1 and 2 miles, there is no grocery store. This is what is called a grocery gap. Okay. Now, the USDA generally defines low access as like a given residential area that has something like 500 people, and perhaps those 500 people occupy at least 1/3 of that general area. And within that area, there is no grocery store within a 1 mile radius. Okay. And then to make matters worse, these people are low income, and so their likelihood to then have a vehicle is slim to none. Yes, of course, low income people do have vehicles, okay? But the likelihood for certain families who don't have vehicles means that they do not have immediate and quick access to the grocery store, which then means you're looking at a theoretical circumstance in which, represented by my little figure on the left and my little fictional grocery store here on the right, the distance, the spatial distance between that person where they live at home and getting to a grocery store perhaps could take anywhere up to like 3 hours round trip by bus. Now, keep in mind, from the journey home to the grocery store, let's hypothetically assume that takes an hour. Then let's say you have to spend an hour or so grocery shopping and then another hour getting back home. You still have to carry all of those things because you can't just load it into a cart, put it in the trunk of your car. Most of these people cannot afford Uber or these little robot cars that are driving around nowadays. They can't put their groceries in there. Okay. So what happens is, in order for you to get access to that healthy food, you have to engage in extreme levels of energy expenditure. And between the journey from home to the grocery store, you are inundated with fast food. KFC, Burger King, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, McDonald's, Popeyes, yada yada, the list goes on. Subway, etc. Now, if you put yourself in the shoes of this kind of person, if you're this kind of person, and yeah, maybe you want to be able to make a home cooked meal for yourself, but you have to go through all of this just to get that home cooked meal for yourself. Is it worth it? Or is it easier to just go and get the fast food option? It's going to be so much easier to just go and get the fast food option, which then means in these communities where people are living in grocery gaps, okay, or what are so sometimes called food deserts, these people are over relying on fast food to basically sustain themselves calorically. So they're getting the calories, they're spending their money. Maybe they're getting meals from the dollar menu, they're getting it from the value menu, but they're getting the calories, but they're not getting adequate nutritional value, which is going to create a phenomenon of obesity. So some people like to think, oh, how can you be impoverished? How can you be in poverty and you're suffering and oh, you have EVT, but you're also obese? Like how to make it make sense? If you're obese, it must be because you're eating a lot, right? Well, no, it's more like you're eating a lot of the wrong foods because you don't have immediate access to those things. Now, what does this look like in the context of the United States? Well, let's just take a given state before we look at this nationwide here. Okay. In a given state, I want to look at a region called Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Okay. Now, 17 to 23% of those individuals who live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, sorry, it's taking so long to generate the map, they live in a food desert or a grocery gap. Okay. That is signified by the zones in red that you see here for Baton Rouge. This is in the state of Louisiana, and this is Baton Rouge County. Okay. So within Baton Rouge, the people who live in those red areas here are people who are living in a grocery gap. They do not have immediate access to a grocery store within 1 mile. And within that mile, where there might be a grocery store accessible, okay, there's a bunch of fast food. The fast food is everywhere. Okay. Now, if I asked you, racially speaking, if you had to take a guess as to the racial composition of those people that live in this region, what might you guess? They're probably black. And yes, indeed, these are what superimposed in these red maps. The racial distribution of these regions is that these people are in fact black. Okay. Now, that's Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and oh, it's a red state. And am I picking on red states? And oh, do I have a political agenda? And oh, blah, blah, blah. Well, no, I don't have a political agenda, but I do want to draw attention to the fact that this phenomenon is nationwide, but it tends to be the most prevalent in red states. Now, we're only looking at Baton Rouge here. Okay. What if I showed you a map of across the country, and it's going to go through the whole god sorry, I copied and pasted the last slide, so it's going through the whole food montage again. I'm sorry about that. Okay, human error, and I'm sick, so just give me grace. Okay, here is a map of the United States. This is from the University of Chicago. I want to say they have yeah, here we go. University of Chicago Data Science Institute. Okay. And you can access this citation. Just Google Grocery Gap Atlas, University of Chicago. They published this last year. This is grocery gaps across the United States. Okay. Now, this is a little bit more intricately detailed here. I have a little rubric down at the bottom so you can kind of make sense of what you're seeing in this nationwide gap here. Okay. So we have on this little rubric here, we have two different degrees of evaluation. We have market concentration, where market concentration is going to be like concentrating grocery stores, but also concentrating fast food restaurants. Okay. Then on the other axis, we have poor food access. Okay. Where poor food access is going to be like you don't have access to healthy foods at all. It's really just um, uh, fast food. Okay. And the darkest blue that you're seeing is like a perfect balance between the two. So if we lean purple, we're saying it's a little bit more like grocery like. But if you lean in more like teal, it's a little more fast food like. Now look at what you see here. Now you see that fast food and like leaning into the absolute conditions where fast food is concentrated is peppered throughout the United States. But if we had to make some let's say crude evaluations here, crude assessments, a lot of it is concentrated in the South, in the Bible Belt. Okay. Now across the nation, sure, but also concentrated in the South and in the Bible Belt. The white areas that you see here, those white areas, I am of the understanding. Someone is welcome to fact check me in the chat if you would like to. If you go to searching this on your own, my understanding is that the white zones, excuse me, are the zones with no data. Okay. But in general, we do in fact have nationwide data where we can see that metropolitan city centers tend to be those that are densely concentrated with grocery stores. Those are the pink colors that you see there. So Miami, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, Detroit, right? You see those things. And then outside of these major metropolitan cities or the blue territories, these regions that are historically blue, you get large concentrations of like grocery gap isolation. Now, pathologically, when I said this is how you get to obesity, this is what I'm talking about. This is the mechanism by which America has become fat or obese. Is yes, you can be food insecure, you can be malnourished, and still be morbidly obese. And when I say morbidly obese, I think I described this last week or the week before last. When I use the word morbid, I'm not using that as a judgment on the character of another human being. I am using the term morbid to describe the likelihood to then develop diseases as a consequence of the obesity. Okay, so morbidly obese here is describing the morbidity patterns that increase one's likelihood for heart attack, stroke, diabetes, etc. Okay, so it tends to be the case that residents within areas that are grocery gaps are 25 to 46% less likely to have a healthy diet. Now, their access to that healthy diet is probably going to be largely facilitated by proximity to food, and if not proximity to food, accessibility to food via having a vehicle. But then that means on the back end that what you see is obesity rates within these grocery gaps tend to be 52 to 90% higher than those areas where grocery stores are accessible. So, for those of you who might have been able to travel across the United States, you've been to different states and cities. Maybe you've even done a thing. I've done a thing where I've traveled cross country in a vehicle, okay, making stops along the way at various locations. And you can kind of get a feel for the general population, at least on the surface, of like what life looks like for them. And in many of these inner cities, by inner cities, what I mean is those residential areas, those communities that are isolated and away from diverse areas, but then also away from the border, they tend to have larger rates of obesity. Now, how much is the U.S. spending in healthcare for obesity? I want to know if you can guess. I'm not necessarily looking at the Instagram chat right now, but I want you to think to yourself. You don't have to type it out in the chat or anything like that. But I want you to think to yourself, how much do you think that the United States is spending in healthcare related costs to address obesity in the United States? The very same obesity that it is logistically creating through these grocery gaps. Now, nationwide, and not in Louisiana, that is a typo. God damn it. I'm sorry. I'm sick. Please give me grace. That is a typo. That is not in Louisiana. I specifically made the edit and did not remove Louisiana, so please forgive me. $385 billion. I will go back and correct all of these citations and then include them in the Patreon. I'm so sorry. You're going to have to give me grace. I am under the weather, so I'm not operating at 100% capacity. Please give me that grace. Okay. We're still here for it. $385 billion nationwide. nationwide. Isn't that interesting? And think about the likelihood that we might be able to say this money could be better spent on other things like education, like perhaps operations that are desperately needed under a universal healthcare system. The things we're not necessarily getting, we are paying $385 billion collectively as taxpayers to address a problem that is absolutely avoidable. Now, in other countries and Asian countries, they heavily regulate the prevalence of fast food across countries, which means fast food exists. McDonald's exists, KFC can exist, but they exist in limited capacities, and the government has a responsibility. They exert the size of these meals that are sold to customers. They also make things, at least to my knowledge in Asia, they also create a thing where healthier food is actually cheaper than a lot of these fast food places. Healthier food options, home cooked food options are more prevalently available than fast food. I'm going to give my throat another break for just a few minutes. I'm going to blow my nose here. I want to show you this video because I want you to see what a grocery gap looks like in the context of the United States. And I'll come back in a few minutes and then we'll talk about it.
Well, carrying bags and bags of grocery into your home may seem like a hassle, but for some, just getting to the store is a challenge.
Closed doors at 2 grocery stores left a gap in the city of Peoria, and Treasure Roberts joins us to explain how it's making it harder for some neighbors to get the produce they need. Treasure.
Kimberly, Eugene, in January of 2018, neighbors lost easy access to fresh food. Kroger locations on Harmon Highway and Wisconsin Avenue closed up shop, impacting 2 low-income neighborhoods. Every week or so, you look up and it's that time again. You need to fill the fridge. At your nearest grocery store, you grab fruits, vegetables, and snacks. Check out, then go about your day. For people like Nigel Meeks, getting there is easy. About how long does it take you to get here?
5 minutes.
He's so close to Hy-Vee that he doesn't even need to drive.
It's very convenient having the grocery store here so close to home, because I can walk.
Then there's Nancy Rice. It takes her about 15 minutes to get to the store.
I've always had close access to grocery stores, no matter where I've lived.
But Nancy has a car. For those who don't, the longer the distance, the harder it is to get the groceries they need.
With people like me and people like us that have to go to the grocery stores, it's a hassle to go.
In 2018, Peoria lost 2 Kroger stores, limiting access to fresh produce on the south side and East Bluff. This
is a huge gap.
Is what you call a grocery gap.
It is definitely a hardship in this community.
It forces some to settle for stores with less variety.
It affects their health because a lot of times these people go to places that get in, get out, that don't have quality food. They tend to eat snack items or just regularly non-healthy food items when they get a chance, if that's what's close enough to them. Or without transportation, they may go a little hungry at times.
Us in the north end and the south end, we have to get on the buses to go to the grocery stores.
I wanted to see how long it'd take to get to the closest grocery store, so I caught a bus from the CityLink station. Stop after stop after stop, we were still on the bus. 16 stops and approximately 25 minutes later, we finally arrived at a grocery store with produce. Keep in mind, some then catch the bus back to the station, then walk home, limiting how much they can carry. City leaders know there's an issue, but it's not up to them to bring grocery stores back to Peoria.
They left because the cash registers weren't ringing enough.
It's the corporation. They're looking at profit. They look at profit and loss. That's all they look at. They don't care. They don't care about the resident.
Grocery stores look to this area and say the same thing we are saying. You're losing population. You have low-income individuals who are food insecure and may not have the funding to finance buying at a local grocery store.
City Councilwoman Denise Moore says leaders are asking stores to choose Peoria, but it's a collaborative effort and will take more than just the city. Local organizations collaborated with the Regional Fresh Food Council to produce a report concerning the grocery gap issue. Now the next steps are to search for entrepreneurs interested in launching and operating grocery businesses that serve the South Side and or East Bluff neighborhoods. Also, this Saturday, November 16th, you can find fresh foods, vegetables, and fruits at the Southside Farmers Market. I'll have this information for you on ciproud.com. Eugene.
Okay, right. So that's what a grocery gap looks like. It looks like sometimes grocery gaps are created because grocery stores are either operating at a loss and so remove their stores, remove their businesses, and then the people that live in those communities then suffer the consequences. And then they incentivize, well, hey, somebody else can open their own grocery store, but then the implication is that grocery store is going to be operating at a loss, right? So that's what that might look like. Okay. Now, what is it costing people? Okay. On average, to my knowledge, most people who live in grocery gaps are going and getting food from the corner store. If you look at the interview from this specific news clip article, they're interviewing people in front of a Walgreens because that's where people have access to food. That's a little bit easier than where the grocery store that disappeared was offering. But is Walgreens giving fresh produce? No. At best, at Walgreens, you're going to find sugar, candy, frozen foods, sodas, these kinds of things. And generally, if they're not getting them from a Walgreens or something like that, they're getting them from like a liquor store. I don't know if you've ever walked into a liquor store and seen its fresh produce. It's usually disgusting. But the food that it costs, the cost of that food from a corner store is generally marked up 7 to 25% higher than what is generally found at a grocery store. Milk is sometimes 5 to 17 or 16 rather percent more expensive in these places. Bread, it tends to be 10% more expensive. Cereal, 25% more expensive. It's not ideal to get your food from these places because of the economic severity here. Okay. And so then the people who are least able to afford it are then those individuals that are like paying more for food. Okay. Then we have the likelihood for economic development here. Two more slides and then we're done. This is the second to last one here. Okay. What you need to understand is that grocery stores essentially serve as like anchors for vitality in neighborhood communities. Okay. So when grocery stores close, property values will like nosedive. And property values nosedive because who wants to move into a community or an area where they don't have easy access to food? These are like undesirable conditions to live in. So if you can imagine then, it becomes a thing where when a grocery store leaves, it leaves behind like a cavity, an economic cavity, if you will, that has like downstream consequences, not only on the economy, but it serves as like almost like a dead weight on the vitality of the community. So now imagine then that there are large regions across the country, all throughout the country, that are economically stumbled under this weight. Okay, so now what happens is on the inverse, attracting stores to a specific area will attract residents and increase property values, and it can increase other commerce, but in doing so, usually results in gentrification. This is what is described as the Whole Foods effect. I was gonna talk about this. I ultimately chose not to because I felt like I'd rather pivot to a discussion around SNAP benefits. But the Whole Foods effect tends to happen when a specific community that does not have a grocery gap presents itself economically as an opportunity for investors to take advantage of. And they can take advantage of it by buying out the homes and buying out areas at low, extremely low prices, renovating them, increasing the property value, and then reselling it to higher income individuals. Okay. And so then what happens is what amplifies the likelihood for gentrification to happen here, what facilitates this is when you get those high end, high scale markets with extremely marked up prices that then move into these grocery gaps and essentially take advantage of them And when you get a Whole Foods that comes in, now technically it's not a grocery gap anymore. There is a grocery store there, but the residential communities cannot afford to shop at these stores and then are driven out because they're incentivized to do so by people that want to buy their properties at low prices. Okay. So this creates the existence of grocery gaps facilitates a thing in which it further destabilizes the American economy and destabilizes the lives of community residents that were there before. And community developers, residential developers, everybody more or less is familiar with how this game functions. Now, for those of you that are familiar with gentrification, at least to whatever extent you might be, you can then think about how this might be a pathway for gentrification to occur. Now, I want to show you this because this is relevant. This is a day old. And after this slide, I think there's one more, and then we'll go on to a Q&A. But I want to talk about this. I want to show you this. Right now, with SNAP benefits being shut off for the month of November, federal judges have ordered the Trump administration to disburse those funds to families, especially amidst the government shutdown. And here's what we're currently facing right now.
Back rooms, power grabs, rigged elections. That's what Prop 50 brings back.
SNAP, commonly known as food stamps, was set to run out come November 1st. Now, federal judges are weighing in, and we could have an update as soon as Monday.
We're thinking about how we can address our family needs, that our families take care of meals on the weekends, and they use their SNAP benefits to do that.
Food pantries and assistance services across the state are expecting an exponential increase in need this weekend and moving forward as more days pass in the government shutdown.
So we're figuring out how can we provide prepared meals for them, and what can we do to make sure they're taken care of over this coming month.
On Friday, a federal judge ruled that the USDA must fund SNAP during the shutdown using money that's part of a multi-billion-dollar rainy day fund. In his ruling, Judge John McConnell said by allowing SNAP benefits to lapse, there is, quote, no doubt, and it is beyond argument that irreparable harm will begin to occur if it hasn't already occurred. Here's what President Trump has to say about SNAP benefits.
And, largely when you talk about SNAP, you're talking about largely Democrats. But I'm president. I want to help everybody. I want to help Democrats and Republicans. But when you're talking about SNAP, if you look, it's largely Democrats. They're hurting their own people.
In a social media post, Trump says he has asked lawyers to get clarification on how we can legally fund SNAP as soon as possible, but notes it will still likely come with a delay. In Washington state, 900,000 people, including 300,000 children, are losing their benefits for the time being, as Republicans and Democrats in Washington, D.C. still can't come to an agreement on a spending bill to reopen the government.
Overall, is struggling vulnerable Americans who rely on this benefit to be able to put food on the table.
Here in Washington state, Governor Bob Ferguson says he's going to start allocating $2.2 million weekly to food banks to ensure Washingtonians can still put food on the table. Natalie Fahmy, Coma News.
Damn, I'm so sorry. I started talking and I didn't realize I was still on mute. So let me backtrack. I'm sorry. I'm a one-man show here. I wanted to recommend this book to you called Dying of Whiteness. Okay. This is a book written by Dr. Jonathan Metzl. It's about how the politics of racial resentment is essentially killing America. And in this book, Jonathan Metzl is disambiguating how essentially right-leaning conservative Americans would prefer to punish poverty and punish the poor than to help themselves. And it's creating a circumstance in which there's food insecurity, there's increased risk of mortality, there's increased rates of cancer and heart attack and disease, and it is facilitated by this pattern that he's calling a social epidemic he characterizes as whiteness. Not necessarily the same, yes, the same term of whiteness as like from whiteness studies and things like this, but he's characterizing it as a social epidemic. Okay. And so I want to recommend this to you because as we're talking about this, I've shown you the blackface caricatures of people making fun of EBT recipients. I've talked to you about food insecurity, how it's concentrated in Black communities, and even among those people who might be receiving EBT. If they live within a grocery gap, then does the EBT really help them to have access to healthy foods? No, right? So it's a thing where, like, in our politics right now, where there's a tug of war between Republicans and Democrats about how to fund the next fiscal year, it is characterized by a social epidemic that Dr. Jonathan Metzl describes as whiteness. And it's highly informative. He interviews a lot of these people. He uses demographic data, a lot of population level statistics. There's some interesting tables and graphs in there, but it is namely a book in which he is going around, and you can read about this. He's interviewing different people in different cities, not necessarily trying to win them over and make a convincing case, more than he's trying to understand exactly what drives their politics, even as they're suffering from making decisions that don't even benefit their own well-being, right? And so I wanted to make that recommendation to you as a way to at least perhaps connect to a lot of the things we're talking about, but specifically this needless phenomenon that the American landscape is currently facing in terms of food insecurity. That's where I'm going to leave it for this particular lecture. We'll stop right there for this week. However, I do want to open up for Q&A here. Give me a moment to allow people to start their video and unmute themselves. You are now able to do so. Please feel free to chime in if you're listening, and also in the Instagram live stream. If you're listening on the live stream right now and you have a question, feel free to submit your question into the chat. Eventually, I should be able to get to it. Thank you so much for participating. Feel free to chime in. What are your thoughts? What are your feelings about this? Would you like to talk about it? Where are you in the United States? Perhaps you can connect this to your own personal experience. Feel free, just kind of one by one, chime in, raise your hand, that kind of thing.
Hi, doctor. Hi, June. My name is Jasper. I'm from Los Angeles. Currently at the USC School of Architecture. Um, right now, I think that's a big conversation of the subject of whiteness and disparity within the marginalized communities within the building environment. I really enjoyed how you talked about the sparsity of grocery locations, things like that. Um, one positive thing that just recently that has been happening in LA is in South LA, there's Black community residents that are making micro farms, from their residences, and teaching other residences on how to do that to, understand they understand the sparsity and the disconnection of groceries and resources like that. So I guess that's just me coming from an optimistic point of view, being a student of architecture, but I definitely, coming from a low income background, growing up in Pico Rivera, California, around like 17 miles away from downtown LA. I faced, I mean, and at least my family grew up, I was raised on SNAP benefits, food stamps at the time they were called. And yeah, it's very strange that maybe like a third of my family decided to vote for the current president. And yet now they're facing real realities, consequences of what occurred, and there was big conversation that led up to that, you know, um, and there was still a divide. And so, yeah, I really enjoy your last topic a few Sundays ago about whiteness as well. And I hope that the future designers of the world can consider all these things and gentrification, and all that. But no, thank you for everything that you do.
Yeah, sure. And thank you for chiming in, Jasper. It's interesting that you say that. Can you speak to a little bit of this topic around growing up on SNAP benefits, EBT? What was that like for you? Can you kind of demystify, perhaps destigmatize, perhaps the intricate details based on your own experience that other people might not be familiar with? And then, in addition to that, um, could you kind of bridge the connection for how your family may have justified or rationalized voting for Donald Trump, despite the fact that they were dependent on these things?
Yeah, at least for myself, at a young age, my family did what they could to make ends meet. My family had a auto body and fender business for about the first 13 years of my life. After my dad passed away from cancer, my mom being a single parent, it opened up opportunity for her to get more aid. But, of course, I'm sure there was moments that my mom can speak of that, she had to move things around to make, her food last. Currently, my mom's on a fixed income. She's just permanently disabled. She's been disabled since the age of 30, and she's now 69. And yeah, she has emergency food in the freezer just in case from different programs that have provided stuff like that for her. And that's just my personal family, but my cousins, all that, they have multiple children. They have made poor decisions from a younger age, bringing in a child maybe at a time that they weren't ready financially or even mature enough to do so. And so, yeah, they're suffering and they rely on these benefits. And for some reason, the idea that immigrants are relying on these resources from food to the money that California gives to the immigrants. Also, um, uh, uh, the healthcare that's provided to them. There's this huge idea that these funds are being dedicated to them. Therefore, that's why the cost of living is so high. That's why uh, these other circumstances, and it's the immigrants, and some might say it's even the trans community at some point. And at that point, they really don't have any idea what the hell they're talking about. And so, yeah, I'm grateful to say that things are better now. I live independently on my own, and as a student, I have thankfully, I found a good job, worked my way up, and that's what provided the opportunity to me go for me to go back to school. So,
Sure.
but yeah, I guess I can say I'm one of the selective few that kind of out of the percentage that they say that does come out of that environment. But yeah, I look at my family, and a lot of them aren't in a very good place, and yet they voted the way that they did, and so yeah.
Sure, sure. Thank you for sharing, Jasper. I really appreciate that. And hopefully that clarifies for those of you who are listening in the IG live stream as well as those in the Zoom chat, just a little bit of what that might look like on an experiential level. I have a person here. Their name is Trev VG. You'll have to forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that. They say, you've spoken about legacy work. What are your thoughts about bringing back small corner or grocery stores or bodegas? I'm all for it. I actually, believe it or not, I lived in Brooklyn for about 2 years. I was a professor at St. John's University in Queens, and I used to commute back and forth between there. And bodegas were kind of my go-to, as well as the mom and pop shop corner stores that were there. And they were my go-to because they were in such close proximity. Now, having said that, I cannot necessarily speak to the economic standing of some of these businesses. Are they hustling and bustling? Well, no, because they were a little bit run down, a little bit. But were they were able to sustain themselves at least through COVID, to my knowledge, because none of them really shut down amidst the COVID crisis. But across, like, let's say the West Coast, right? Across the West Coast, these are like locales where regions are really far spread. Residential areas are quite far spread. They're not as densely packed as like New York City, for example. And so let's say for like the city of Los Angeles, Jasper attended USC. I'm assuming you're here in LA. I'm in LA too. Um, it's not really easy to get access to grocery stores or corner stores unless you have a car. So it becomes a thing where if we even increase the numbers of the availability of these kinds of, let's say, business opportunities, but then also food opportunities for people to purchase or acquire better or healthier options, it's still not necessarily going to increase accessibility without some mode of transportation. So it's a kind of give and take on the West Coast, but on the East Coast, those things already exist. So it's more about geographical context is where I would speak to those things. Thank you for asking that question. Is there anyone in the chat here in Zoom that would like to chime in, perhaps share a little bit of experiential wisdom, ask a question?
I think one of the things that I was thinking about kind of throughout um, your presentation was I was thinking about redlining a lot, and I was wondering kind of what the correlation between all of these food deserts and all of this poverty in regards to, you know, the redlining that started what in the 60s, 70s. So I was wondering your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so we're going to get to redlining. We're going to, first of all, we're going to get to the topic of residential segregation. One of the reasons I'm kind of delaying that a little bit is because I anticipate, I believe it might be this week, I'm going to be lecturing on that in my class on campus. And I just don't like having back-to-back redundancies because some of my students who skip class will then jump in and think that they can get the same information, but I highly modified it. And I just don't want, I try to funnel them in that direction, right? So I try to pivot to other topics, but eventually I want to say perhaps within the next 2 weeks or so, we're going to get to this topic of residential segregation. But in the topic of residential segregation, that absolutely overlaps the phenomenon of grocery gaps. And for a multitude of reasons, it's not really as simple as black and brown people exist in this area. Well, don't put grocery stores over there. But at least early on, that's how it was facilitated, is to some extent, business enterprises, business owners thought it a little bit um, indecent to vend or to have business or ongoing business relations with people of color. It's kind of inappropriate in a way, in the same way that it's inappropriate to live in close proximity to them, right? And so on this basis, then, where you have a dense concentration of people of color, you then get businesses that are selective about whether they want to open up a store or not. And then it becomes a thing where it's not even really about serving the community, it's about what are the economic prospects. Maybe we can sacrifice a little bit of our brand by opening a location in this area, but if we do so, what are the prospects that we're going to generate profits? How can we manage that business? How can we sustain and move forward? And so then it becomes a thing where the persecutory politics and culture that comes from racism in the United States creates this perfect circumstances for people of color to have to fend for themselves to survive, which then increases crime rates. And because it increases crime rates in the context of food, sometimes that means they're stealing food, they're stealing things off of the shelves, and then these stores are running at a loss. And then because they're running at a loss, eventually the stealing becomes so regular that they're forced to shut down, and then they shut down, and then you end up with a grocery gap. And so it's a circumstance where it is in part facilitated by residential segregation. It's also facilitated by other things. To answer your question, Justin, yes, we can talk about last week, not necessarily at the end. The Q&A is really just open to really anything. I have people that chime in, they jump into the thing because they want to ask something that's completely unrelated, and they're welcome to do so. It's just that the general theme is the conversation for the week. And so right now we're talking about food insecurity. That will kind of be the backbone of this discussion. But if you want to chime in with something else, now's your time to do so. It's a Q&A. So Justin, would you like to just chime in right now?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about, I guess, the last week. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can hear you. Last week, for those of you who are listening, you might not be familiar, we were talking about colorism. And I went through the history of colorism, the politics of colorism. It's kind of like in-group racism and racial discrimination. And we were talking about the topic of light skin privilege. And Justin chimed in. He described himself as a light-skinned, green-eyed black man who had a lived experience that was fundamentally different than what I was describing and what other people were relating to. And so I gave Justin the floor to chime in, but he did not necessarily hear the entirety of the discussion. So I invited him to watch the video on YouTube and then come back this week and share his thoughts. So now here's Justin.
Okay, so when I think the problem or the disconnect that I had was you're categorizing like all light-skinned people together. When you're going through your presentation, you were talking about passing, right? So
About what? What was that?
about passing. About we were talking
Yes.
about passing, right?
Yes.
And then
Yes.
from passing, all these resources were established. Now, there's a difference between black folks that are light-skinned black folks. I'll just use three examples, real life examples. It's Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Isaiah Hartstein. All these guys are basketball players, and like I Steph Curry is not mixed. Klay Thompson is mixed, and Isaiah Hartstein is mixed. Klay Thompson is, you can see he's clearly black based on his hair and his features and stuff like that. And Isaiah Hartstein would be considered passing, right? The problem, the thing that's not really talked about really is the fact that we think that someone who has to deny their own self is a privilege and cannot come out as black or something like that, cannot come out who they are, and we assume that that's a privilege, and that is it's really, really, really bad. You talked about a lot of things on there. When I watched the presentation, there's a lot of stuff I went to Bogart your stuff with last week, but I'll bring up two things that stand out. Freddie Washington, which wasn't brought up in the presentation, was a female, and you probably know about her, about the female, a woman who was a superstar in the early 30s in the movies and stuff like that, who was passing, who refused to accept to go in that, even though monetary gain, and she still had to deal with the brazens of white supremacy. And there's a bunch of people that I brought up last week that has to deal with that. I don't think that there's a light skin privilege when you admit you're black. The only time there is any type of privilege is when you deny who you are, and that's not a privilege at all. That's really, really horrible. Also, in the source material, when you have this, and it's not you that's person, when Margaret Hunter, who was teaching out of Oakland at the time at Mills College, which is a small school, and she defines, when you say things like light skinned privileged people, people of color, over their dark counterparts, when you say that you're light skinned people, you enjoy substantial privileges that are unobtainable to dark skinned brothers and sisters, when you say things like, and these are word for word in your material, when you say things like damning things that are just outrageous, like the bottom line is light skinned kids benefit and dark skinned kids pay the price. That is word for word what's in your source material that you brought. I find that incredibly divisive, offensive on both sides, on multiple levels. So I just wanted to clear that up. It's not, if you're light, you get a pass. Everybody that's in the community and stuff like that still faces the brunt of white supremacy and has to deal with their own struggles. So another thing I would just also like to mention, because I read the source material, one thing they did talk about light skinned people that wasn't brought up is the fact that light skinned people, light skinned African Americans particularly, have to always fight for their racial authenticity. If you look light skinned, for example, growing up, somebody probably said you sound like you talk white. That's a common thing, or if you're educated and stuff like that. So just because you have, if it's a perceived proximity to whiteness, you can be prosecuted within your own community. So I just wanted to bring up these really, really poignant points just to let you go ahead and rock with it. Okay, that's
Yeah,
all.
sure. Thank you, Justin. Before you, I don't know if you're going to chime out, but I'd like to at least follow up and then get a response on the follow up. Thank you for your feedback. First of all, I'm not like Charlie Kirk, right? Perhaps I say something that you fundamentally disagree with, and I'm not the kind of person who's going to shut you down and shut you up and condescend and blah blah blah. I find that counter narratives are valuable. They're insightful. And I encourage my students to provide counter narratives if they feel like they disagree with anything that I say or that I'm teaching. I always encourage them to speak up, and I've always been motivated year after year to incorporate some of those critical perspectives into how I teach in the future. So I absolutely welcome the counter narratives that you have to say here, and I do think that they're valuable. Having said that, I do want to ask you. Because last week there was a little bit of a back and forth, right? There were two black women, forgive me, I don't recall their names, two black women who described themselves, at least appeared to be darker skinned, and felt as though a little bit of what I was saying was in accordance with their own lived experience. You felt like you were on the other end. Um, can you help me to better reconcile perhaps the things that they were saying? If I recall, one of them said something to the effect of, "This is just your own experience." What were your thoughts about what they were saying? And to be clear, no one really is coming at you with a persecutorial, trying to shut you down, say you're wrong kind of thing. But can you help to reconcile perhaps your own lived experience and your perspective with perhaps the validity of what these other people are experiencing on their end of their life experience too?
So this is what the reason why I even chimed in was because absolutely, the reason why I chimed in for this was the idea that I said it happens on both sides. It happens on both sides in both situations to the proximity of power, right? So if you're a dark skinned person and you get go ahead and there's a group full of light skinned people and you're the minority and you get go ahead and talked about your dark skin, it's traumatizing. It lives with you for the rest of your life. If you're a light skinned person and there's a group full of guys or a group full of girls and they talk to you about your skin complexion or they say you're not black enough, you have to prove your authenticity, it lives with you for the rest of your life. I'm not saying one doesn't, both of them happen on both sides of the spectrum. It happens. It's horrible on both ends. I know they were giving examples of that, but one thing that I was thinking and was talking to just people in the community, just getting insight, right? That including other light skinned people, it's it's something that's been going. I guess you could say that this has been going on off and on since slavery, right, or since we got here, and it's part of kind of sort of unfortunate part of our American culture. So it happens on both ends. I know they were using the paper. I think they were talking about the paper bag thing and stuff like that, which happens in colleges. That used to happen in colleges and stuff like that. There's historical references, but I don't think that when you go to the hardcore colorism line, that I'm going to have more education than you than I'm light skinned. I'm going to make more money than you than I'm light skinned. I'm going to do that, which is in your source material. I don't think that's applicable.
Okay. Well, thank you for your feedback. I really appreciate you chiming in. Thank you for following up. Please stick around because maybe you have some other perspectives that are certainly welcome and valued on the topic of food insecurity. But I really appreciate you chiming in and following up. And hopefully, we'll perhaps come back around to this topic. And if you kind of regularly chime in, I'd love to hear from more about what you have to say. I'm also going to review the contents of this video and see if I can do things to improve the material. I don't act like I know everything. I don't think I know everything. I don't want to act like I'm preaching the inerrant word of God here. So I will certainly value what you have to say, and I'm gonna consider that. Thank you so much. I want to turn my attention to anyone. Perhaps I'm just gonna kind of briefly jump in here really quick. Um, I just want to see if there's any updates on the IG chat in terms of questions. I don't really see any questions. Friendly reminder, if you're in the IG chat and you're listening right now, you have a question, you're curious to know about something, feel free to type that question in there. I will eventually get to it. But back to the Zoom session here, is there anyone that wants to chime in, perhaps in response to colorism for Justin, or perhaps on the topic of food insecurity? Anything that piques your fancy? Maybe you have a question. Maybe you have a personal experience, lived experience, something you'd like to share here. I'd
I
like to
got a
open it
question,
up to
Dr.
you.
Dole.
Yeah, sure, Caleb.
Um, so it seems like with the lapse of the SNAP benefits and the government shutdown, and um, also I mean, you can tie healthcare into it, but I mean, why is the caricature of the Negro minstrels being brought back up in 2025 and the Reaganomics welfare queen cartoon coming back up in 2025, and even Halloween, and you got racist influencers bringing it up? I mean, I know it didn't ever go nowhere, but um, disproportionately, white people are going to benefit from food stamps and SNAP benefits than any immigrant or any minority group across the board. So, why is this projection and deflection happening? I'm
Yeah,
not really understanding, because I mean, honestly, that doesn't solve the problem at all. It
yeah.
just makes things even worse, you know.
So first of all, I want to say that I don't have the absolute answer here, but I can perhaps opine based on what I know. Okay. And what I know is that American culture is capitalism. And in a culture of capitalism, the culture is going to be dictated by the values of the so-called bourgeoisie, the people who are the elite and the high up. And so from their values, those are the ones that are centered as the norm. And because they're centered as the norm, they're looking down on the proletariat, the people who are the common average citizen who do not have economic power and standing, as those people who are essentially weights on their pockets. Okay. So these values about, oh, now the government is giving out benefits and these people don't want to work for it and blah, blah, blah. It's a thing where that's the rhetoric of capitalism. That is the rhetoric of a capitalist society that is passing judgment on people who do not function and live their lives as capitalists. They're not succeeding as capitalists, right? So these people who are fundamentally dependent on government assistance are then looked at as welfare moochers. They're lazy. They're entitled to things that they haven't necessarily earned. And so, because of that, because people happen to be social creatures and social beings, it's something of a norm where people are inclined to make themselves feel better by putting others down. And so, who can you look at to otherize? You're going to look at the people you already otherize. Who are the people who you've already otherized and who you've already subjugated culturally? Black people. They've always been at the bottom of the totem pole. If they weren't slaves, they were homeless and wandering the American wastelands in search of work. You were trying to get them back on these plantations to pick your cotton and harvest your watermelon and your peaches. And then when you couldn't do that, they started running for political office and winning. And then you started assassinating them and trying to put them in their place because it's indecent for Black people to have cultural and political standing. So these values carry through the American timeline of history, and you get to a point where blackface never really went away. Even before we look at like Halloween and all of that, there's examples of like blackface references in American media and culture. I don't know if you've seen the film Tropic Thunder, for example. There's another film that comes to mind that puts a spin on blackface called White Chicks, for example. Blackface as a cultural staple survives the American timeline and it never goes away. So in a circle of racial isolation where white people happen to live in racial exclusion and are historically racially segregated in certain pockets of America, they are still segregating and kind of isolating racial sentiments that never really went away. And some of those sentiments are rooted in the myth of Black inferiority, brown invasion, this idea that, like, if Black people are receiving any kind of assistance, any kind, even if it's deserved, they don't deserve it, right? There's this notion, for example, right, on the humanitarian principle that Black people, by virtue of slavery, should in fact be entitled to reparations that Japanese Americans got during internment, reparations that Native Americans got as even though we could debate about whether they really got it or not, reparations was extended to this group on the basis of colonization. Black people don't get reparations. Anytime you look in my videos, you'll see people, if I answer a question about reparations, they'll say, no, you don't need that. You don't deserve it. You shouldn't have it, and blah, blah, blah. It's this notion that Black people receiving help, assistance, even if it's deserved, is undeserved. So now turn your attention to this notion that SNAP benefits are getting cut off, and we automatically default to SNAP benefits being something that Black people are not deserving of, they're not entitled to. And then in addition to that, even though white women are disproportionately receiving SNAP benefits, it's a Black thing because the moment we link undeserved politics to whiteness, we start to have to reconcile where our values even came from. And we don't want to do that. It's a little bit uncomfortable. It's easier to just default to passing judgment on Black people. And that's where that notion survives. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I have one more question if it's allowed.
Okay.
I saw something, I think it was yesterday, and it was saying that in America, it was around 70 something percent of white people don't even have um, like a relationship with one Black person or something like that. And I just wanted to know What would the harm be in something like that? If it is true, I'm not sure if it was. I don't know
Yeah.
how they came up with that. It's got to be mostly self-reported data.
Yeah, to my knowledge, because of you have to remember the historical precedent around racial segregation, is that racial segregation was a norm in American society. And because racial segregation was a norm in American society, that carries in pockets of America that have maintained racial isolation. It carries into the friends we know, who we fraternize with, who we regularly commune with, the type of worship when we go to church on Sunday or Saturday, depending on the denomination of your faith, right? The kinds of barbershops you go to, everything in America, socially speaking, is dictated by a historical norm and a culture norm of racial segregation. So this notion that lots of white people live in racial isolation. There's this woman, she's a whiteness scholar. Her name is Robin DiAngelo. She's spoken to this personally and professionally that in her life, before she became a whiteness studies scholar, she was able to pretty much live her life entirely in racial seclusion and isolation and never have this notion communicated to her that she lost anything. She never really felt a sense of loss by not having connections with other people of color, and so that can be extended to large pockets of America that maintain racial isolation, where yes, it's kind of normal to kind of not really know or fraternize with people of color at all and never really feel like you lost out on anything. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. um There is this person. You'll have to forgive me if I'm mispronouncing in the IG live chat. Their name is Elvado81. They say people born here would shun them. They even took in extra jobs to make ends meet. Is this a common thing among most immigrants? Would you say American citizens tend to also not want to be on SNAP? Yes. In general, there is this collective American sentiment that if you are receiving welfare benefits of any kind, there's like a sense of shame that comes from that. That you should feel shameful for not living up to the values and standards of an elitist capitalist society that says your value, your primary worth, comes from the labor you give these big corporations. Look at the propagandistic narrative that can shape how people even feel about themselves in a state of crisis in their own lives. That they feel shamed that uncontrollable circumstances led to their need for external assistance that they are then receiving that no one else is going to shame them for, but the culture is going to shame them and they're going to call them lazy, even though that person might not actually be lazy at all. There are plenty of people, not just unemployed people. There are plenty of people who are working 2 and 3 jobs, making minimum wage, and still cannot afford the basic cost of living, and so need to rely on SNAP benefits and are carrying a cloud of shame about that. And it's rooted in a norm of capitalism, and that norm of capitalism is your value. The only way you can be proud of yourself as an American is if you are slaving yourself away for someone else's profit, for someone else's benefit. That's the only thing you take pride in, your hard work in making someone else wealthier. And so then that sentiment carries on to this notion of SNAP benefits. Now combine it with historical and cultural racism, and you can see how the stars align. I'd like to open up for another question. Some people are chiming in here, but they're having a conversation,
Hi,
I see.
it's Armida.
Yeah, yeah, Armida.
Actually, Jasper's my son. I was freaking out
Oh,
seeing him. I was like the jazz music,
yeah.
So I guess one of the thoughts, because you took me different places. I was going to talk about the snap originally, but I never wanted it. I mean, as a little kid, we had it. My dad left, and we needed it, and we'd wait there for hours, hours as little kids. It was so humiliating.
Yeah.
And then, I felt like embarrassed. Like sometimes we see our friends from school and we all knew why we were there. And as I got older, I got completely off all that stuff and went to work. My bosses at the time was Amy's Pastry in Montebello. It was a really good place, city of Montebello, and and if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have worked into the system where I worked at a KFC. I gained 10 pounds in 1 month from just eating wings. I loved them so much. But when I worked there, they were Japanese. They met at a concentration camp, and they were such a blessing to me. And I thank God for them because if it wasn't for them and the hard work that I did also, and the respect to customers and everyone that came in, and try to be a witness to them about my belief in my God, you know, to be a light to them, uh, that helped me to be a better person. I seen them respectful, clean, like the old Stevie Wonder song, we might not have much, we might wear the same clothes, but they're clean, you know. And so I thank God for that. And then later on in church for many years, there was a one white American family, couple. They never had children, and she mentioned that at one point, not knowing that I had a lot of friends that had SNAP or food stamps at the time, or now they call it EBT, all these things, and she kept going on and talking about them. And I finally couldn't take it anymore. And I told her very nicely and respectfully, they only get it because they qualify. They get it because they qualify, not because they're begging, asking, whatever. And then they come out with all the immigrants. They're getting everything for free. They're going to get $1,000 or what? Go buy a house, and they keep saying all this craziness. Like they said, yeah, give them $1,000 to go buy a house, and then they're going to lose it because in less than a month they're not going to have the money anymore. They're not going to have nothing. They're still going to deport them. Another friend of mine is telling somebody she knows, well, let them get the money and let them go live a life back in their other place. But they don't want to go. They have their children here. They have their grandchildren here, and it's just really, really sad and heartbreaking. There's a little store at the corner of my block. It's been there forever and ever. I lived here in Pico Rivera since 1973. And that little store, one day I went, it was like 7-Eleven. You pay for convenience down the street. So I went down there with my girlfriend one time. I don't have my car working. And so we stopped. To my shock, I bought a soda and a bag of chips. It was like 12 something dollars, and change. And I said, I'll never go back there again. And they're like, not Hindu, but a different nationality. I talked to them nicely. They talked to me nicely, but for $12, I'll never go back to. I could be nice somewhere else, but or they can be nice to me somewhere else. But all to say, there's so much need out there, and we have to keep the faith. I like one thing that I think it was, what's his name? Forgive me, I'm not good with the sports, but when I watched the Dodger game yesterday and everything went like it did, what's his name? The big tall black guy. Was he a basketball player? Come on, you guys, know who it is.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, he was out there, and he
Magic.
after the game.
Oh, Magic Johnson.
There you go, Magic Johnson. Thank you. He said, "It's not. It's not anything with the color. It's sports. There is no color. It's like you're out there. You're just. We should all learn to be like that.
It's the fact that they have a need, and that need, the conditions that they qualify for is the reason why they're receiving it. It's not because they're in pursuit of a free paycheck.
They probably had nothing.
Sure.
They're giving back. Everybody's giving back, so we should never forget to give back.
Yeah. Thank you, Armida. Thank you so much for chiming in. Layla also says here, on this notion of shame, is we shame the people who need the benefits, but not the corporations who pay so little. In my opinion, corporations are the welfare beneficiaries. They get tax breaks for hiring people from the lower income brackets, and then they pass the cost for their employees to have food and have health care on to us, the taxpayers. Absolutely. Absolutely. The only reason why billionaires exist in this country is because they have benefited directly from government welfare, being given several $100 million to do something that they don't do, and then they pocket the money and do something completely else with it, and none of them end up in prison. Absolutely. So this notion that we should be shaming people for receiving benefits, for being dependent on assistance or something like this, it is simply a capitalistic, propagandistic rhetoric, a rhetorical idea to reinforce this notion that you shouldn't receive help and you should be slaving away to a capitalist system. Stephanie?
Yeah, I'm on that subject. How do you talk to people who say shit like that? Like, I they don't want. They say everything's the Democrats' fault. They're saying that everything is Black people's fault. How do you tell them? I directly tell them, like in Facebook posts and things. I say, this is the truth. It's not the Democrats that are shut down the government. It's, you know, the billionaires are stealing your money. We've already paid into this. How do you talk to people? I tell them the truth.
Yeah, sure.
What do you do? They shut me out. They like block me.
James, do you have an answer to this question?
Yeah, so I mean, I grew up with a lot of the same stuff that you hear come out of Trump's mouth and his base is the same shit I've been hearing my entire life. Um, so to me, whenever Trump Trump's political machine rose to power a decade ago, it wasn't really a surprise to me because it's the same stuff that I've been hearing basically, like I said, my entire life. And you can like even like my family, you can go to my family and I can try to explain to them why why I think they're incorrect or why they're wrong or why the things that they're saying aren't reality. But at the end of the day, if they aren't willing to listen, there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, I was going to say essentially the same thing. It's like a battle of truths. In one sense, a person has a set of beliefs that they've inserted their ego in, and there's no amount of fact checking that's really going to win them over, just because you can espouse a different set of ideas. However, I do think if you can find that critical question that doesn't assert a different set of values, but you're asking them a question to get them to think through what the logical answer is, that is one way in which you can get a person to reason themselves into the correct answer. But you have to figure out what that critical question is. I know, for example, Jordan Klepper. This is a Comedy Central guy. He goes to lots of these Trump rallies and he asks people these questions on the spot. He's really good at doing it. I don't know what his training is, what his background is, what his preparation is, but he has a great way of asking questions that force different people to think about the logic of their beliefs. I am not an expert in that and I don't know how to do it, but my inclination is to lean into doing that. If you can find whatever that critical question is and ask it rhetorically, sometimes you can win people over. Ryan, you want to chime in here?
Sorry, I'm on my phone. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's okay.
All right. Um, I'm a post 9/11 retired Navy veteran, member of About Face Veterans Against the War, and I've done a lot of soul searching and learning about politics since I got out of the Navy, because in the Navy is very conservative in general. And when I say conservative, I mean there are some Democrats that are conservative also. Um, One thing I've realized about our political system is that it's all capitalist. We have two capitalist parties. We have a liberal, like a socially liberal capitalist party, and a conservative, a social conservative party, to oversimplify it. And a lot of them have the same goals. A lot of them we know for a fact are bought and paid for by corporations. When it comes to Trump, talking to people that somewhat agree with me, or the organization I belong to, Veterans About Face, um, we align ourselves with some Democrats because we can agree that Trump is fascist and the MAGA movement is fascist. Um, if you're not familiar with fascism, just read Umberto Eco. It's a good place to start. But when it comes to talking with people who don't align, especially MAGA MAGA people, it bothers me because they vote for things, like my family and my mom's side were Chicano, and it really bothers me to see people, white people who I fit in with most of the time, vote for things that hurt their own friends. And you even get brown people, but with my understanding of fascism and how it rises, and even just far right wing ideologies in general. But when talking with the everyday population, like Mr. Doyle, I believe your title is Dr. Doyle, had said, is finding a something to connect with people. It's really hard for me to connect with people because I am against fascism, right? I'm completely against fascism, which classifies me as an anti-fascist, as or Antifa, which is a bad word now. And so instead of saying things like, I'm an anti-imperialist, which I do say quite often, I ask people questions like, what is your definition of capitalism? Why do you, you know, uh, aligning myself in conversation with them with and this is not just coming from me, this is people along that are in lateral organizations with our anti-imperialist movement, but aligning ourselves on a working class proletarian type lateral, because you have a lot of people who are conservatives who see the lies and assimilate that with Republicans because they're telling you that, oh, we're going to trickle down economics, or depending on what kind of Republican you are. Um, for like Trump, for instance, he's a capitalist and now he's aligned with the state. But I don't know. My point is effectively is aligning with points like Dr. Doyle said, finding working class um, topics to align yourself with that person and help them figure it out. You know, um, I heard this example the other day of on this talk show that I heard about a lady, a working class woman who is in the hospital, works in the hospital, and she was going, I had to pay this thousands of dollars to have a baby. And I see it happen all the time. And then you have some undocumented person coming in having a baby and they get it for free. And the host of the show was like, okay, so your problem is with you having to pay that money, that excessive amount of money, not with the person who's getting free healthcare.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And I had the same issue coming out of the military. I was conflicted because I'm hanging out with other Chicano kids way younger than me, but they're like, I got free college because I'm brown and female. And part of me is like, yeah, cool for you. Good for you. You got a head up on life. And the other part of me is like, I had to work for it. And so I had to reconcile those two things. But I eventually came to the conclusion of who gives a shit if this person is getting something for free? My question is, why the fuck did I have to work my ass off for something that probably should have just the
free?
The society contributes to it anyway. Sorry for
Yeah,
my
no, it's
sailor
okay.
mouth, but
But ultimately, you have contributed a substantive amount here. That part of that touches on why I'm even doing this, and I've said this so many times. I don't think that the information that I'm sharing here should belong behind an $86,000 paywall. Right? This is information that you shouldn't have to apply for college, and then maybe if you get in, and then maybe if you happen to register into my section of my course, because there's other people who teach the same titled courses but teach it in a fundamentally different way. And now you're paying $86,000 and going into debt on student loan debt that you'll never be able to pay off for the rest of your life just to have access to this information. I'm just going to give it to you for free. And that's the thing. That's the thing too. It's the thing with healthcare. It's the thing with food security. It's the thing with the gripe is not other people having access to these things for free. It's why the fuck are we having to work for it? Why do you have to slave away? Why do you have to dig yourself into debt? And I think to answer your question, Stephanie, about getting people, perhaps I think Ryan has a great approach here, getting people to understand it might not necessarily be trying to shove an alternate set of truths at them, but getting them to realize that their problem is not actually the emphasis that they think it's about. It's about this capitalist bullshit. It's about the fact that their wallets are being robbed and pickpocketed by people that are then convincing them the people who are getting help are the problem. Right? So perhaps maybe a way to recalibrate people's understanding is kind of on the example that Ryan gave, is if you find that people are complaining, why do I have to pay $10,000 for giving birth to a child in a hospital and this immigrant gets it for free? Well, then, hey, look, your problem is not actually the immigrant. Your problem is with the fact that you have to pay this money. Stop politicizing and stigmatizing this immigrant and start politicizing and stigmatizing this capitalist corporate greed bullshit. That's critical right there, because I'm not a conservative, and I feel like Charlie Kirk is kind of like he's facetious in this regard. He'll just argue against he'll be the contrarian for the sake of being the contrarian. But a lot of the conservative leaning people are not necessarily contrarians like Charlie Kirk is. If you approached it that way, would they agree with you? Is there even a point of contention with saying something like that, right?
Right.
So maybe the critical approach is, like Ryan said, connecting it back to what the core problem actually is, which is almost never the fact that it's an immigrant, it's a trans person, it's black people, it's something else. The problem is capitalism. Right?
Yeah, and there's this book.
Final thoughts. Bring Back Your People by Aaron Scott. Tell us about it, and then we'll have to wrap up.
Okay. So this is a faith-based book by a trans man who lives in Washington, my state, where Kurt Cobain grew up. He is a pastor. He puts the book toward bringing back Randy, your brother Randy, your cousin Randy, a white person, poor white person. This is hard. Trying to talk with your cousin about why they've gone to white Christian nationalism, why they've gone to MAGA. And it's because the white Christian nationalists are actually listening to the problems of white poor people. And they have money, hundreds of years worth of consolidated money to support this campaign that they're doing. So just like Peter Thiel and the Heritage Foundation and everyone is doing with the government right now.
Yeah.
So
they're speaking to their needs.
Exactly. And they speak to it in church too. So all aspects of someone's life, they're speaking to it. And so I'm over halfway through, but it's at the point where I don't know, it's hard to I'm at the part about religion, and he suggests that you have some sort of basic knowledge of Christianity so that you can talk to your cousin about
like
your
find
own faith.
Find the middle ground,
the commonality
that you can then build a bridge of connection to be able to then mutually. Sure, that absolutely makes sense, and I think that touches on what Ryan was saying.
Yeah.
But we've gone over 2 minutes,
sorry.
right? No, it's okay. Thank you so much for participating. And look, ultimately, I'm starting to see how this whole podcast thing, if you want to call it, is taking shape here. Is that in us having these discussions, we start to discover the truth together. Do you see how this works? And believe it or not, these are the same kinds of critical discussions that we're having in my college settings. So this is the kind of thing that I want to do regularly. Next week, we're going to be talking about labor market discrimination, obviously labor market discrimination in relation to the production of race pattern disparities. But thank you so much for participating, and I will see you all next week. All righty. Have a great week, you guys.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks,